Bucks close out. I can't believe we're still talking about this series as the Sixers are now in danger of a historic playoff collapse. Joel Embiid's overtime winner in Game 3. Philly was up 3-0, but Toronto's won the last two. And following that loss, Embiid said that teammate James Harden needs to be aggressive and be himself. He added it's not really his job. It's probably on the coach. Speaking of that coach, Doc Rivers, he's lost 7 of his last 8 chances to close out a series. His 31 losses with a chance to clinch a series, most by a coach in NBA history. Doc getting defensive?
Well, it's easy to use me as an example, but I wish y'all would tell the whole story with me, all right? My Orlando team was the HC. No one gives me credit for getting up against the Pistons who won the title. The Clipper team that we lost 3-1. Chris Paul didn't play in the first 2 games and was playing on one leg. And then the last one, to me, is the one we blew. That's the one I said, we blew that. I would say with me, some of them is I got to do better always. Always take my own responsibility. And then some of it is circumstances happen. You know, this one, let's win it, and we don't have to talk about it.
Let's bring back Monica and Alan. Hopefully you guys can talk me off the ledge. Monica, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your level of concern here for the Sixers entering Game 6 tonight in Toronto?
Nagandi, my friend, my level of concern is an 8. Han, wait a minute. My concern level is at an 8. And it honestly has less to do with Doc Rivers and more to do with his players. Now, I don't mind that sound from Doc Rivers. It's honest. I think that he mentioned that Orlando team. That was very impressive. However, it's a results-driven industry, and the recollection that most of us have is the last time that happened to him. Now, when it comes to his personnel in this particular matchup, if Joel Embiid doesn't have 35 and 12, they will not win Game 6. Like, he just cannot rely on anybody else. Even when they were hot and we were asking if we were concerned about James Harden because Tyrese Maxey was emerging at the second scorer, Alan, I thought that as long as Joel Embiid was putting up MVP numbers and he got help from somewhere, they would be okay. But if he has anything less than 30 and 12, it's a problem. It's a problem.
You got to also look at the other side of the court, too, and defense. Look, I'll use the phrase again. Confidence comes from demonstrated performance, and it also works here with the Sixers. Now, first and foremost, spare me the slander of Doc Rivers. This is a guy that won a championship and in a 5-year span, a title, a finals appearance, and an Eastern Conference finals appearance as well, while the Miami Heat were the big 3 there. So he can coach and he can win, and he's done it. But the demonstrated performance does include this. This is how you get an 0-3 meltdown. This is the recipe for disaster, Kevin, and I'm sorry, but this is the reality I'm giving you right now. Hold your nose. Here comes the cold water. Injury to a star player. You got that. You got disconnect with your main players in the locker room. Joel Embiid, I don't have to tell him to shoot more. That's up to the coach. There's a disconnect. There's also the history of falling short. The shot by Kawhi in the playoffs a couple of years ago by the Raptors. And then, of course, you can't beat the Atlanta Hawks. You got a guy on your team that didn't want to dunk the basketball, all those problems. So because of that, getting over the hump, those 3 items right there, that suggests a recipe. But I'm not putting this on Doc Rivers, although it will certainly.
Alan,
the sword of Damocles is hanging over his head, no doubt.
How much did El pay you to mention the Hawks this morning, winning last year against the Sixers? Honestly, like how much? Because now I'm going to hear that for the next 120 minutes. Like nonstop.
Look behind me. Look behind me. Do you see Nick's references? You think I want to talk nice about the Atlanta Hawks? You're crazy.
Let's get the one thing. Hey, let's get the one thing. And Monica, I wanted you to jump in here because, listen, it's not just about Embiid, and the defense was awful, especially in the first half of Game 5 here. How are the Raptors neutralizing James Harden? Because he does not look like the James Harden that we saw in Brooklyn, and let alone the idea of James Harden in Houston.
On another show, Kevin, we'll all have a fireside chat and honestly be honest about the version of James Harden we've seen for a couple years now since Houston. But anyway, in this particular series, it's the length and the switching ability of the Toronto Raptors. Nick Nurse is a fantastic coach. And in the last game, while most folks thought, oh, Fred VanVleet is out, Philly should take care of that, it was actually the size that was an additional factor that James Harden and his teammates had to hurdle because of the length in which they were able to switch, similar to what the Boston Celtics were able to do. Beyond that, the Raptors were able to outscore the Sixers in the paint, and a lot of that was transition. They were getting good looks. The confidence starts to snowball, and you could just see it.
It's about adjustments. We've seen Nick Nurse make those adjustments the last 3 games. Will Doc do it tonight? And Alan, did she at least give you $100? That's what I want to know. Like, Elle, let's go to you. All right,
I almost threw up in my mouth just talking nice again about the Atlanta Hawks, but reality is reality, unfortunately.
Okay, cut it away. You know what?
Monica,
honestly, if the Sixers lose tonight, you don't need a fireside chat, Monica. Kevin's going to need a couch for therapy, okay? He's defeated and done. All right.
Kev is broken.
He's a broken... Stop me if you've heard this before.
Oh, boy.
It's a tradition unlike any other.
Oh, no.
A playoff team with Doc Rivers at the helm, blowing a commanding series lead. The Sixers looked like they were cruising to a first-round sweep of the Raptors until the happening. 2 straight losses and momentum shift to Toronto. It's the 3-1 Doc Rivers narrative, and he is not having it as you take a look. It's deja vu. Rivers is the only coach in NBA history to blow multiple 3-1 series leads. He's done it 3 times. In fact, the last time they did it was in 2020 with the Clippers, right? It cost him his job against the Nuggets. But today, you have to listen to this sound. Rivers imploring for more context when you say that he leads teams of chokers.
I wish y'all would tell the whole story with me, all right? My Orlando team is the HC. No one gives me credit for getting up against the Pistons who won the title. That was an HC. Go look at that. I want you to go back and look at that roster. I dare you to go back and look at that roster, and you would say, what a hell of a coaching job. The Clipper team that we lost 3-1. Chris Paul didn't play in the first 2 games and was playing on one leg. And we didn't have home court. And then the last one, to me, is the one we blew. That's the one I said, we blew that. And that was in the bubble. And anything can happen in the bubble. There's no home court. Game 7 would have been in LA, you know. But it just happens. Some of them is I got to do better always. Always take my own responsibility. And then some of it is circumstances happen. You know, this one, let's win it, and we don't have to talk about it.
You see what y'all did? Y'all made Doc Rivers so mad, he started pulling receipts. He said, go back and check the tape, Kevin.
We didn't do anything.
You know, my question is, if this happens, does he get credit for a blown 3-0 lead and a blown 3-1 lead? He'll get both of those.
Well, he'll have history because no one's ever blown one.
Both.
Yeah.
What, 143 times?
They're up
The team is
3-2, but it doesn't feel like it.
It doesn't, exactly. Where's your confidence level here, Legs, for tomorrow night in Toronto, potentially Saturday in Philly here? Because they're up 3-2 in the series, and stop laughing at me, El.
It would be better if but for the sound after Game 5. Nobody that stood up at that podium sounded like they were confident they were still in command of this series. And that was really concerning to me. I mean, the way they played defensively was concerning. The way it looked like the pressure was affecting them was concerning. But most concerning was what everybody, all the principals in this series, had to say afterwards. They didn't instill any sort of confidence that they believe they're in command of this series. It's starting to sink in. I think they've got a better chance to win Game 6.
In Toronto.
I do. I think Game 7 at home. Look, we all saw what happened last year. I was down there for 2 of those home games against Atlanta. They lost 3 games in that series, but Game 7's the one, obviously, when the most pressure was there. We know what it's like in that market, in that city, and in that sport. I think basketball at home and in Game 7 elicits a lot of pressure in a place like Philadelphia because of what happened last year.
In that arena, too. It's tough to breathe in that arena when everything's tight. And by the way, the Hawks, they were eliminated yesterday.
They were a play-in team, and we haven't been processing for 14 years. Also in the East, defending champion Bucks looking to close out their series against the Bulls. If Milwaukee does advance, Legs, what are your early impressions of their potential second-round matchup against the Celtics?
I think right now, I look at Giannis Antetokounmpo and I say this is a guy that, to me, is different than what they just dealt with in Kevin Durant. I think when you throw that kind of defense at a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo, physically, it's a different profile. This requires 5 guys getting back to the paint to take it away. The Bucks broke through a barrier last year, and for me, they were the favorite coming into the postseason to make it back to the finals. But I look at the absence of Chris Middleton, and I think now that series basically is a toss-up. A lot of people think Boston would win it even if Chris Middleton was there, the way that they're playing. But for me, I still like Milwaukee. I like the Giannis factor in this, the way Jrue Holiday is playing right now. And I just think it's a little bit different matchup than what you can throw at Kevin Durant because Giannis can overwhelm you with his length.
By the way, Petty, I wasn't laughing because your Sixers are spiraling. I was laughing because the beginning of this segment felt like Philly sports radio. Just two old guys yelling at each other in a cloud.
This is true, but at least we weren't yelling at each other.
The only part of that I resent is two old guys.
That's true.
Right.
What are you saying?
I'm the only one that has confidence in your team. You're going to win. Relax.